Hello, Keith. How you doing?
Hi, Tony. Back again.
Back again. Keith, I think we touched an issue in our last episode, which was kind of interesting, about being in the middle between management and our employees. And an issue that you and I have talked about in the past is how do you manage, the confidentiality issue?
Yeah.
You know things about restructuring but you can't release them yet. And you know things about employees that have to do with their personal life or health. I always found that to be very, very challenging, in that being right in between. Your experience.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Yeah, we were talking about the cheese in the sandwich, a good vegetarian solution.
That's right. That's right.
Because yes, you touch both sides. You are, as a part of management, because they need to plan, they need to make arrangements for things. You're part of that process when there's a restructuring going on, or changes which are afoot, new technologies being brought in, or something happening. In a good company, they will have HR up at boardroom level, senior level, and they will give them that information. Now, you are in a very difficult position then, because if you know that affects people, you have to be confidential enough and know that you can't just start talking about that immediately.
Well, but there was a problem that I had. I don't know if you had to face the same issue. You're talking about, for example, a restructuring, but the restructuring is done by, if it's done by the organization, the same organization you're in, there's people in your organization who are working on it. And I found that sometimes things leak out because the people who are working on it are also part of maybe the union or the staff association, or are not committed to keeping particular secrets. So, how do we manage that?
Well, the rumor mill. I think we also mentioned, I think, in an earlier podcast, the importance of communication. So if you've got confidentiality and you've got communication, clearly those two have to be balanced out. How much do you tell, and when do you tell it? Because also, aside from you knowing that the restructuring is taking place, and aside from you knowing that it could leak out, you also know, in many cases, the personal circumstances of the staff that are likely to be affected. Indeed, you yourself may be affected. So, or your people, direct people in your HR team. So, my goodness, that's a tightrope to walk. It really is. But the answer is communication. It's knowing what to say, even if it's bad news, or even if it's not totally clear yet, but knowing when you can announce that there will be a restructuring taking place and more information will be released shortly, something like that.
Well, what I found difficult was sometimes I had the union reps or staff association reps who were also part of the restructuring team, going there and doing things. And so things would leak out, and I would have to, because there would be rumors going around, I would have to bring people in and say, look, if you don't let us as management do our job in proposing something, and you're already into protesting or not, you're just becoming an obstacle, becomes very difficult to have an honest relationship, because it means that everything's in your hands. You know everything, you know what's going on. And even before we're allowed to make a proposal, you're protesting. So I found that to be a very difficult situation. That was more like with local unions than international professional staff.
And that's because, again, what we've said, we're in the sandwich, whereas the unions are definitely on the workers' side of the sandwich, the white bread. So, their ultimate goal is slightly different, and they will want to give people information, rightly so, I guess, as quickly as possible. But the problem is, and back to the communication, if the information they give is not correct, that can cause an awful lot of damage. If final decisions have not yet been taken by management, it might be what they're thinking of, but it's not what they're actually going to do in the end, then that can cause an awful lot of damage. People will, for example, leave because they fear that their jobs are going to go, so they leave. Or just generally, the morale drops. Yeah, really tricky.
Well, you see, what I also found is that if you don't even give management a chance to come up with a complete idea, which is not necessarily the final approved decision, but you have to give management a chance to formulate a concept that then you might have to present to the staff or to other stakeholders, because sometimes management has an idea, but they're different stakeholders. It could be a board of directors. It could be nations. Depending on the type of organization. but not always what management is thinking of is then going to be implemented. So if in an early stage, as soon as management starts thinking about something, there's already interference, then it becomes a problem. That's where I think that our role as HR becomes important also in being able to tell the staff or the workers, yes, there's a process going on. It goes back to what you were saying about communication. There's a process going on. We have to give the parties a chance to come up with an idea. And then based on, if you have, I remember, for example, in Germany, I remember that management could make certain decisions, but then they had to sit with the worker council and explain what they were going to do. And then how that managerial decision might affect the local community. It's not sufficient. You can't just say, well, we made a decision based on profit or based on company interests. If that company's been in a community for many years, then they're stakeholders. But if you don't even give management a chance to come up with the idea, and that's what I found is the biggest problem that at least I had to face with leaks or with people being both part of the staff organization, association, or the unions, and being part of the team that is doing the restructuring. So I found that to be one of the hardest things in my career.
I can certainly agree with that. And one of the other areas that we touched upon last time, I think I'd like to expand on a little bit, if I may, and also get your input on. We talked about management saying things, and sometimes in HR, you have the role to kind of tell them, hey, hold on a minute, don't release that. And one of the areas that constantly caused an issue for me, I thought, was when managers reveal the results of promotion reviews or appointments to people before the time that they're actually told. And they don't realize what disruption that causes. But if you have 5 people for an interview and the manager leaves the interview and then tells Fred, by the way, you've got the job, before it's been properly ratified and before the other 4 know. And then Fred starts telling people the disruption is terrible. And the worst case I ever saw was where a manager had explained that Fred, for example, had got the job. This was when I was working in London. And when it came to handing out the envelopes, Fred got his envelope, he opened his envelope up and he looked at it and he said, you've not been successful, because a change had been made later on. Something had come to light. It wasn't the final decision. Now, can you imagine the embarrassment of that? Can you imagine, how Fred felt, and not his real name, obviously, and how the manager felt? So HR does have this role in somehow keeping confidentiality itself and also helping managers and individuals in various roles to also understand the importance of confidentiality and the importance of communication, but saying the right things at the right time.
Well, that whole issue of gossip, rumors, that is... that's a whole chapter. I mean, how much damage can be done by rumors going around. And that's why I think you have to be ahead of things with communication. You have to be able to give, and when something is not being communicated right, you have to be able to go up the chain and say, not make these statements for the following reasons. Sometimes if the organization has a legal advisor or if you have a lawyer that is part of the staff, then you need to kind of also explain how some things could have a legal consequence. If you start saying, sometimes even a compliment can become, saying something nice can become an issue. So you don't want to take away the possibility of being natural in communication. But on the other hand, you have to teach many times managers and leadership, you have to teach them how to be prudent about how to say something in a way which is not then going to come back and damage the organization. And I think
people do. People look to those statements by senior managers, which maybe throw away unthinking things as being really important. So again, I've had that in an interview where at the end of the interview, a senior manager on the board said goodbye to one of the candidates, shook their hand and said, that was great, well done. Now, unfortunately, it's only a little thing, but that person left feeling that I've definitely got this job. I've definitely got this job. And when they didn't, of course, again, it's, well, what went wrong? Something's not right here. I wonder if at the bottom of this, we're talking about trust. I wonder if that's something that's really at issue here. When communication is open, honest, even if it's not good news, or when communication is withheld because of the damage it can cause, ultimately, I think that can build a bit of trust. That people know that when you speak, what you're saying is truthful, even if it's not to their advantage. At least they know that you're open. And I think that's very difficult.
Yeah, I think that's where the role of the HR manager becomes very, very important in establishing a relationship of trust with all stakeholders. And so that's where you have to show that you are impartial that you're following the rules, that you're looking for the good of the organization and the staff. And that's where your philosophy also becomes important. Like I come from a school that says, well, it's not necessarily true that staff and the organization are adversaries. I come from a school that says that, you can be all part of the same team. It's not true
Yeah.
that unfortunately sometimes, especially in the United States, the concept is created that, staff or employees are a cost element of the balance sheet at the end or the profit and loss statement. And unfortunately, that mentality then becomes a problem in dealing with people because management sometimes has that way of being. But if you find the right balance where people are feeling that they can trust you and what you're saying, then yes, sometimes even bad news can be taken in a way which people will still work with you, and you can work with them to try to get them the best package possible. And that's if it's an issue of termination, if it's an issue of redundancy. But sometimes it's not even that. You're not even at the point of a redundancy. It's just internal communication, which create, a lot of people don't like change. So if you have to
No.
change the way the offices are working or, the work hours or even the location becomes an issue. So you have to find a way of communicating things as soon as possible because stuff
Yep.
gets out. I
Yeah.
don't believe you can keep secrets that long. I mean, at some point something gets out, especially when you're dealing with hundreds of people in an organization.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. And I think that one of the areas which is, again, very much in HR's basket to deal with is the area of promotion.
Mm-hmm.
We're living in a different world now. Used to be, I think every organization sort of thought that the more people you looked after, the more people you had under you, and the higher up you went in the pyramid, which was typical, the better it was. What we're seeing now, I think, it's flatter structures,
Yeah.
and that people's careers are going to be moving sideways rather than up, at least for some part of their career.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I think is, again, another thing which HR gets itself into difficulty with is when people come to them and say, but my manager promised me I was going to get promoted. My manager said that when this person left, I was a natural successor and I didn't get the job. So something's gone wrong. How can that be? And that's something, again, that you may give me your examples, but I can certainly give you examples of mine where I've been on an interview board and somebody you could tell was the person that everybody thought was going to get the job. But actually their performance at the interview board wasn't up to scratch. And another person did a great performance and got the job. And what happens then is, it was a fix. It was a fix and they shouldn't have. Or the person who they thought was going to get the job does get the job, in which case they say, it was a fix. It was a fix.
Yeah.
Difficult
Well,
one
the
for HR.
criticism is going to come either way. Maybe,
Yeah.
one of the things that organizations need to look at is when you are doing an interview for promotion for a position, a higher level position in the organization, or any position in the organization, if you have internal staff that are competing against people who are coming from the outside, do you really need to just base everything on the interview? Or is it okay to have evaluation of the staff member based on what everyone knows about that staff member? Or do we create this fictitious thing of saying, no, we don't look at how the person worked in the organization, everyone's equal, we're going to do a board and the board's just going to look at everyone and it's your performance in the board. Well, your performance in the board, someone might do it very well in the board and not turn out to be a good employee anyways. What's the right balance? So that's something
Whoa.
that I don't have the solution. But if I were to be discussing now with an organization saying, it says, we got these great people here, but, our rules say we have to open up to the public and to everyone. Yes. Okay, true. You have to open up to the public and so on. But what are you going to do with your precious human resources that are working in the organization and are doing really well? And now you're going to have them compete against the whole world. And maybe the people who are coming in, some of them have practiced a lot on doing interviews and very good. Which brings to mind, I had an employee who was great at every single interview, every single job. He was like, applying for everything, and his expertise was applying and interviewing. I don't know what his real expertise was any longer. So what do you do in those cases? So
I
that's my dilemma.
I think the more information you have as a board, the better. But you have to realize, and that this is something that used to grate with me, is that the information you have on an internal candidate, you know about that person's good points and you know about their, shall we say, negative points or development areas. You have a lot of history on them. When someone bright and shiny comes in from outside, who's applied for the job, seemingly with very good qualifications, very good references, and who wouldn't have good references? I mean, you'd be pretty silly not to attach that. Good references, good qualifications, and as you say, do a great interview. But you don't really know that person. You haven't got as much information. A big significant move forward I remember NATO making was the introduction of assessment centers for senior positions, where you would have psychometric tests, you'd have interviews, you'd have inbox exercises, you'd judge how people socialized, you'd have cases, you spend a whole day, and someone can't really fake themselves too much when they're being viewed for a whole day on a series of different things. And one of the arguments put forward for that was exactly your point. Everyone was kind of treated equally. Then you're seeing how they shape up, plus their qualifications, experience, and what have you. And if that were done by an external party, one of these recruitment consultancies, who doesn't actually know any of the people, that's, again, another plus point, I think. That said, there was always the situation in the organization you and I work for where there was political considerations. And this is the thing that a lot of companies don't have, a lot of organizations don't have, but they have something similar, which is kind of, this person deserves the promotion now. They ought to. They've been here long enough. They've done a good job, and all this kind of thing. So you can have all the facts, you can have all the assessments, and in the end, there's some kind of politics with a small p that comes in and plays its part.
Well, that's where I think the honesty in the organization is very important, with the communication also, is that people should have an understanding of how the organization is going to behave in terms of recruitment and promotions and advancement. And people need to know, and you have to put all the cards on the table. Another important thing is that if you're making changes to the way you've always been doing business, you need to make it in such a way that people understand, and it's not that you're picking on them. Why are they making the change right now? Why is it that for these positions, they've always looked inside first, and then if they couldn't find someone, they go outside? Well, how come now it's the whole world, and I have to compete against the whole world? But if you make the change process and you communicate it and you say, look, starting next year, what we're going to be doing is no longer please expect that this profession is going to, in the organization, and we're going to be looking from the inside. We're going to be looking all over the place. You have to kind of work with the expectations that people have. And when you change things in the organization and the expectations were different, you need to communicate. You need to work with those expectations. If you make believe that expectations, they're not written any place, we have no obligation to you, that's the best way to, commit suicide for an organization. Because when you start saying, well, this is not we didn't write this down, or we didn't make this commitment, or it doesn't say this any place. Well, a lot of things are not written down, but they're said, or they're expected. And that's the organizational culture. And that's another topic for us, but that's another issue. We're close to our 20 minutes. Would you want to do a closing statement? The closing concept.
I think the closing statement is to HR people is you're going to face what you will see as unfairness, but in the end is probably the best that you can do. You will see people that you hire, recruit, whatever, bring on board from the outside who looked fantastic on paper and they don't perform. You will have people who you thought would be wonderful who you recruit from internal because they deserve it. Again, don't perform. It's a very difficult job, so as an HR professional, do your best, arm yourself as well as you can, and know that sometimes you will make a mistake.
Well, Keith, thanks for this conversation. This is another good one, and we got plenty of things to do for more episodes. Sure, there's so many topics. Ciao for now.
Thank you, Tony. Ciao,
Bye
Tony.
for now.
Take care.
Bye-bye then.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.